Australia has one of the finest histories in both Davis Cup and Fed Cup history. They were, I think, second on the all-time list of champions for both competitions, and now they're, what are they? They're 24th and 8th, is that correct, respectively? Where are the players?
Are you looking at me, or?
Yeah. I'm looking at you, but Steve can answer first.
Gee, you're an intimidating woman. There's a lot of reasons. I've mentioned one, court surface. Okay, that's changed. The game's evolved. It's a different game than it was in the 60s and 70s. I would also argue, maybe against some of our great players of the 60s, maybe they would disagree to a degree, but I believe the facts tell you that in the 60s, when we dominated the sport, it was almost predominantly an Anglo-Saxon sport internationally. Yes, there was some South Americans, and yes, there was Europeans, but in post-war Europe, the infrastructure wasn't good with tennis facilities, and their players didn't travel as much as the Americans and the Australians, and maybe some of the Swedes, some of the French, the English, maybe some of the South Africans even. So these days we have between 130 and 135 nations that have a Davis Cup team. When we dominated the sport in the 50s and 60s with the US, 15 out of those 20 years were won by either the US or Australia, and they had a format called the Challenge Round. So if you won the year before, you would go straight into the final of the Davis Cup the next year, at home on your preferred surface. That was your prerogative. So the Davis Cup is a much more, it's a giant of a competition now. And to win the Davis Cup as we did in 2003 is not easy, because you've got a sport that I would argue is the second biggest sport in the world. Now maybe there's people from athletics that might disagree with a little bit of that, but I think soccer is by far the biggest. And I would argue that tennis is, if it's not second, it's in the second two. So it is a global sport. It's not played in half a dozen countries. You know, we're not 5th out of 5 countries in the world in our sport. It is a tough competitive beast. So that's an issue for us. But having said that, I believe that we also have to take some form of responsibility prior to the last 5 years. I think in the decade before the last 5 years, I think to a degree, in certain areas, we dropped the ball a bit. And I think it's no good pointing the finger at anyone. I think everyone in the tennis fraternity has to take a small part of that blame. But I think in the last 5 years, we have turned the ship around. And it's not easy to turn a big ship around, and I think it's turning, and I think it's gaining momentum. I would argue, certainly in the boys' side, we would have probably the best group of young boys that I've seen in the last 15 years. It doesn't mean they're going to dominate the sport or they're going to be ranked 5 or 10 in the world, but I think we've got possibly the best group coming through that we've had in a decade and a half. So, yeah, it's a tough gig to produce Grand Slam champions. We had 2 number 1s at the beginning of my tenure 10 years ago in the men's game. We've currently had a number 6 in the world in the women's game. Number 4, I apologise. Because Sam Stosur's former coach is just sitting there taking some of that credit. Gee, thanks for correcting me there, Craig. Number 4. And so number 4 in, 30 or 40 million female tennis players is not a bad gig. Is it good enough? No. We have to continue to be accountable and try to produce players that maybe maybe we can get 10 players in the top 100 again. Who knows? I mean, the French have done it recently, the Argentinians in the men. And of course, in the women, the Russians have dominated the sport. But don't forget that China is coming. And, in the south of China, and please someone correct me here, they're not a huge race of people, but in the north, they're pretty big people. And the tennis body shape has changed.
We read about these Russian girls who grow up playing tennis in empty indoor pools, and they end up ruling the tennis world. How is it that we can't push 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 girls through?
Well, I think we're doing
Sam Stosur accepted, and
pretty
Alicia
well in the women now. We've got 7 in the top 100, 250. We've got Jarka Groth, who's in the top 30 now, and it's Sam at number 4. That's the best ranking combination we've had since 1983. So we're really making some progress in the women, and we need to recognise that a lot of those players that were apparently brought up in indoor swimming pools actually develop their games in other parts of the world. And so we need to be clear a little bit about how all this unfolds.
Makes a much better story.
Yes.
if they play all their tennis in an indoor pool.
Yeah, and the other story, of course, is that there's a lot of drive. A lot of these people are from environments where this is a meal ticket for them, and their parents drive them in that way, and sometimes that can get a bit ugly, but the reality is tennis does provide that opportunity, particularly in women. 4 of the top 10 earning female athletes in the world are tennis players. And there's a reason for that, and in tennis we pay equal prize money. So there's a real upside for women playing tennis, and I think that we've made some great progress there. We've got a long way to go. We have to get much better at our transitioning. What we've had over the past, say, decade is some great juniors, but they haven't come through and gone on to become great seniors. And we already know that that is a lot longer road than it used to be because of the physicality of the sport. The average age of the top 100 men players is 26 and a half years old. And so the days of seeing someone break through at age 17 and win Wimbledon are pretty much gone. And that's just the challenge that we have to understand that we're dealing with in terms of developing players. But we're in good shape now to be able to transition. The reason for that is we're resourced properly.